They say that when the land stops giving, it's not always the weather's fault. Sometimes, it's because the farmer's heart has stopped believing. Earl Thompson learned that too late. He was once the most prosperous man in Dry Creek Valley, owner of lush acres, father of 3 hard-working kids, and husband to the most joyful woman in town. But everything planted can be lost if it's not watered with love and faith. And tragedy, like drought, arrives quietly. First came the accident that took his wife, Linda, on a sharp bend outside of Clarksville. Then, his kids, 2 sons and a daughter, drifted away, chasing college degrees, careers, city lights. The farm grew silent. The drought followed, cracking the earth and silencing the rustle of corn. Earl held on, until he couldn't anymore. The strong men faded into a shadow of whiskey and grief. One afternoon, dry of tears and hope, he dug a shallow hole near the old barn. He found a single corn seed tucked away in an old pouch. He wasn't thinking of harvest or miracles. He just couldn't throw it away. He placed it into the dry soil like someone laying a memory to rest. Then he went to sleep drunk, sure that seed would die like everything else in his past. But sometimes, God answers when we've stopped asking. Hello my friends, I'm Roger, your storyteller from the Country Life Rural Stories channel. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Our story today is The Failed Farmer Who Buried One Last Seed and Witnessed a Miracle. Earl Thompson woke to a sound he hadn't heard in months: rain. It wasn't a downpour or a thunderstorm, just a steady drizzle, calm and persistent, like a whispered prayer from the sky. At first, he thought he was dreaming. He stumbled out of bed, his shirt soaked with sweat and the stench of bourbon, and stepped onto the porch. He looked up. Warm tears mixed with the cold drops falling from the sky. The dirt, once cracked like old leather, began to darken. The yard, dry and dusty for so long, now smelled like mud and something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Earl knelt in front of the spot where he'd buried that lonely corn seed. He didn't say a word, just sank his fingers into the wet soil and trembled. That seed hadn't been buried, it had been entrusted. From behind curtains, the neighbors watched. Earl hadn't stepped outside before noon in months, especially not without a bottle in his hand. Some whispered that he'd finally lost his mind. Others thought maybe he'd hit rock bottom. But no one dared disturb him. He remained there in the rain for hours, like he was waiting for something else to fall from heaven. On the 3rd day, it happened. The ground where he planted the seed cracked open, as if obeying a higher command. A green sprout pushed through, small but firm. It wasn't a weed. It was corn. Not just any corn. Its color was more vivid, its stalk thicker, its leaves brighter. Earl stared at it in silence. His hand shook again. He didn't run to tell anyone. Instead, he placed a stone next to the sprout, like he was marking a sacred grave. Then he swept the porch, cleaned the entryway, and, for the first time in ages, put on a pot of coffee. When a neighbor asked if he was okay, Earl replied with just 5 words. "The land still remembers me." He said nothing else. That night, he set the liquor aside. Not because he was healed, but because the taste of rain was stronger than any drink. He thought of Linda, her gentle voice, her hands planting by his side, her laughter between the rows. And for a moment, he wondered if maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. In the days that followed, Earl cared for that one sprout. Not with water, but with presence. He pulled weeds, cleared stones, and spoke to it in a low voice. A few town kids watched him from behind the fence. One of them finally asked, "Why are you taking care of just one plant?" Earl didn't even look up. "Because it's the only one that still believes in me." When the sprout reached 1.5 feet tall, something strange happened. The soil around it began to soften, not from more rain, but from a moisture that clung only to that patch of land. And in silence, other seeds, ones Earl didn't even remember planting, began to rise too. Like an invisible root was calling out to lost siblings hidden deep in the dry ground. In small towns, news travels faster than pickup trucks on a dirt road. And the story of Earl Thompson, the broken-down farmer who made corn grow from dead land, spread like wildfire. It reached the general store, the church, and even the ears of the most skeptical folks. Some said it was dumb luck. Others accused him of using hidden fertilizer. But a few began to whisper about a miracle. One morning, Miss Patty and the town's old herbalist showed up at Earl's place. She wore a faded blue shawl, carried a basket of cornbread muffins, and had eyes that saw straight through people. "I came to see what the earth decided to return," she said. Earl led her silently to the sprout. When she saw it, she made the sign of the cross. "This isn't science. This is forgiveness." The sprouts multiplied. Earl, who had spent months hiding inside, now walked the property with his hat on straight, his shirt tucked in, and a rusty old knife on his belt. He had no planter, no tractor, no crew. But he had hands. And faith. Every new row made him ache with exhaustion, but also made something in his chest beat stronger. It was like his muscles were waking up to an old purpose. One day, while digging near the dried-up well, he heard a sound. A donkey. Skinny, worn out, but persistent. It had a frayed rope around its neck and scars of abandonment. No one knew where it had come from. Earl named him Buddy. From that day on, the animal never left his side, as if it too was searching for redemption. It slept under the shed, ate what it found, and brayed every morning at sunrise like clockwork. Word finally reached one of his kids, Mike, the oldest, who lived out in Kansas City. His sister had texted him, "Dad's farming again. They say there's a miracle in his field." Mike didn't reply. It had been years since their last call. But something stirred inside him, maybe guilt, maybe a love he thought was dead. He stayed quiet for now. Earl didn't dwell on his children. Not from lack of love, but from habit. He had grown used to the echo of their absence. Still, every time he watered the plants, he glanced toward the road, as if expecting a silhouette. He didn't ask. He didn't call. He just dreamed. And sometimes, dreams are what keep a man moving. A boy from town, Eli, started visiting. At first, he just watched from behind the fence. Then one day, he slipped through and helped carry a water pail. "Can I come back tomorrow?" he asked. "If you're not afraid of mud, sure," Earl said. From then on, the farm echoed with small footsteps, laughter, and questions only children ask. Eli became the grandson life had never given him. And while the corn grew taller and rumors of the miracle spread further, Earl started writing in an old spiral notebook. He wasn't a poet or a scholar. He just jotted things he didn't want to forget: the date of the first rain, the height of the sprout, the first ear of corn he held in his hand. It was his way of speaking to God, or maybe to Linda. The roots weren't just growing beneath the soil. They were beginning to spread through the hearts of the people, too. Folks from the community, touched by what was happening on Earl's land, started showing up. Some brought old seed packets, others came with rusty tools. It wasn't charity. It was something older, respect for a man who refused to give up, even after losing everything. Earl accepted the help quietly, with a nod or a pat on the shoulder, always offering hot coffee in return. He didn't need to say much. His eyes, now brighter, did the talking. Mornings began before the rooster crowed, and sunsets ended with golden light washing over the corn that once seemed impossible. The old farm, once a graveyard of dreams, now looked like a promise reborn. Buddy, the donkey, had found his rhythm. He carried buckets, dragged branches, and grazed calmly by the fields, as if he understood the worth of every stalk. Eli tied a red ribbon to Buddy's ear and declared him the guardian of the miracle. Earl chuckled for the first time in years. It was rough and short, but real. One afternoon, Eli asked, "What if the drought comes back, Mr. Earl?" The old man looked at him steadily. "Then we plant again. Faith doesn't quit after the first stone." That line stuck in the boy's mind. He repeated it later at school. And just like that, the old farmer unknowingly became a teacher too. Meanwhile, in the city, Mike began having dreams. He saw his childhood again, his mother shaping tortillas at the stove, his father laughing at the dinner table, the smell of wet soil after the first spring rains. Those memories hit hard. But pride, that quiet poison, kept his hands off the phone. Still, his father's number sat untouched in his contacts. Back on the farm, Earl kept carving his legacy into every furrow. He stored small ears of corn in burlap sacks like sacred relics. In one notebook entry he wrote, "The land never leaves us. We're the ones who forget how to touch it." Miss Patty and found that note and started copying them onto loose sheets. "This has to be preserved," she said. The wind shifted, not just the wind in the fields, but in the spirit of the town. What had once been shared sorrow began to look like shared hope. Farmers who had all but given up started clearing their own land again. Not because they believed in miracles, but because they'd seen with their own eyes that a man could rise from the dust. And in the countryside, that means more than any sermon. One night, under a sky full of stars, Earl sat next to the original sprout. It was now a sturdy plant, its leaves wide, tassels forming. He laid his hand gently on it and closed his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. No one knew if he was talking to God, to Linda, or to the soil itself. One morning, Eli found a wrinkled envelope on Earl's kitchen table. It had no stamp, no date, just a name written in faded ink. Mike. The boy didn't ask. He simply watched as the old man stirred the ashes in the wood stove. That letter was only half a secret, like so many burdens men of the land carry when life takes more than it gives. That night, Earl opened the envelope and read the letter, though he knew every word by heart. He had written it years ago, during one of the first winters after Linda died. It was an apology to his son, for the words he never spoke, for the silences that hurt more than anger, for not giving him a reason to stay. But he'd never mailed it. "You get used to the emptiness," he had once written. The night was long. Buddy brayed outside restlessly, as if he too could sense the weight of regret. Earl, letter in hand, walked out to the field lit by the moon. There, in front of the original sprout, now the mother plant, he buried the envelope. Not out of cowardice, but because he finally understood, words weren't enough anymore. It was time to sow action. The next morning, Eli returned with his father, a young man who worked at the local mechanic's shop. "He can help with the well," the boy said. Earl shook the man's hand, and something flickered in his eyes. Seeing a father and son together brought a knot to his throat, but also a flicker of hope. Maybe there's still time, he thought. Work on the farm picked up. 2 neighbors offered their oxen. A widow donated sacks of lime. Even the town preacher, who rarely got his hands dirty, showed up with new boots for Eli. It was as if each small act was stitching together something unseen. No one called it a miracle anymore, but everyone knew something extraordinary was unfolding. A young reporter from Nashville showed up, tipped off by a story shared online. She came with a camera, a notepad, and 100 questions. "What's the secret behind this revival?" she asked. Earl looked out at the corn, then up at the sky, and finally said, "It's not a secret. It's faith that crawled through dirt, got beat up, but never died." The quote went viral by the next morning. Back in Kansas City, Mike kept up his routine. But one night, without warning, he woke up crying. He dreamed of his mother calling him from a cornfield, saying, "Your dad doesn't need your perfection, just your presence." That voice, though imagined, rattled something deep. By sunrise, he had bought a bus ticket home. At the farm, Earl talked less and planted more. Every ear of corn, every new leaf reminded him that life moves to rhythms we'll never fully understand, only trust. That afternoon, while hanging an old hammock, he saw a figure at the gate. It was Mike. Backpack on one shoulder, beard overgrown, eyes wet. They didn't speak. They just looked at each other. Sometimes, forgiveness doesn't need words. It grows. Their reunion wasn't loud or full of embraces. Mike dropped his backpack by the front door and sat on the wooden bench facing the cornfield. Earl handed him a cup of coffee without saying a word. Just that, coffee, silence, and a steady gaze. From the edge of the pen, Eli watched with wide, shining eyes. He knew something important had just started to bloom. For days, Mike helped without asking questions. He carried water, scrubbed rusted tools, and marked new furrows in the soil. They didn't talk much, but they worked in rhythm, like the years apart hadn't unraveled everything. Sometimes, while folding a stalk or tightening wire, their hands would brush. And in those small, simple touches, Earl felt an old bond beginning to mend. One night by the stove, Mike finally spoke. "Sorry it took me so long." Earl didn't answer right away. He poured another cup, stared into the flames, and murmured, "The land teaches you. What you bury with love always finds a way back." Mike nodded, his eyes clouded with old ashes. No more words were needed. The soil had already done the reconciling. 2 days later, Miss Patty and returned with news. The town council was organizing a corn festival in honor of the farm's revival. They wanted Earl to speak, to show his harvest, to share his story. At first, he refused. "I don't have the voice for telling miracles." But Eli insisted. "It's not your voice they want. It's your example." As they prepared for the festival, something magical happened. The plants that had sprouted from the original seed began to bloom early. Their color was deeper, their tassels fuller, their scent sweeter. It was as if the land itself knew it had to give its best version, like it too had a story to tell. Buddy the donkey was decked out with wildflowers by the town's kids. They called him the silent hero of the miracle. He walked proudly through the rows, like he knew he was royalty. Mike built him a small stable by the kitchen, and Eli painted a wooden sign that read, "Here sleeps hope." The day before the festival, Earl found a yellow butterfly resting on the mother plant. He stared at it for a long while. Linda used to say butterflies were messengers from heaven. And for the first time in years, he spoke into the wind with a trembling voice. "Thank you, darling, for not letting me dry up." That night, he placed his notebook, the one where he'd written it all, on the table beside the unsent letter. He sat across from Mike and said, "Tomorrow you read it. I've planted what I had. Now it's your turn to harvest." Mike, his voice breaking, nodded. He knew his father wasn't just handing him the land, he was handing him his soul. The festival came together with tents, wooden tables, and the smell of fresh cornbread and smoked brisket. The whole town gathered at Earl Thompson's farm. No one could remember the last time so many folks stood shoulder to shoulder in a cornfield. Kids ran through the rows, old-timers wiped their eyes, and farmers from other counties came just to see the land that had come back to life. At the center of the field, a small stage had been built out of barnwood and bales of hay, decorated with corn tassels and black and white photos. One of the pictures was of Linda, her smile captured forever between 2 lit candles. Eli had placed it there without saying a word. When Earl saw it, he pressed his lips tight. It was as if she was there too, the eternal seed of the miracle. Mike climbed the stage with the old notebook in his hands. His voice shook, not from fear, but from the weight of carrying a story that wasn't entirely his, but flowed through his blood. He read simple entries: the date of the first rain, the day the first sprout broke ground, the morning Buddy arrived, Eli's laughter in the rose, the letter buried by moonlight. Every word carved a furrow in the hearts of those listening. When he finished, silence settled over the crowd, deep and reverent, like prayer. Then, slowly, a single clap, and then another, until the field erupted with applause. It wasn't just for Mike. It wasn't even for Earl. It was for the land. For what it stands for when a man, even broken, refuses to abandon it. That applause watered something more than crops. It watered hope. Earl stepped down from the stage and walked among the people. He didn't speak, just nodded, shook hands, and made his way to the cornfield. He touched the mother plant gently and whispered, "That's enough. They get it now." Some say he smiled. Others swear he cried. But everyone agrees. The wind in the corn that day sounded like forgiveness. Throughout the afternoon, people left offerings, tools, heirloom seeds, old family photos, handwritten prayers. One note read, "Thank you for reminding us the land only sleeps. It never dies." Mike gathered every token with care. He understood this festival wasn't a celebration. It was a rebirth. Buddy was paraded around like a hometown hero. Eli fed him apple slices by hand and proudly told the story to anyone who'd listen. "It all started with one seed," he'd say. "Just one. But not any seed, a sad seed of love." That's what he called it. And soon, kids all over town began to see the soil with new eyes. As dusk fell, the festival ended. But the echo of what they lived that day lingered in the air. Earl sat by the fire with Mike, Eli, and Buddy curled at his feet. No one spoke. They listened to the crackle of flames, the chirping crickets, and the whisper of the corn swaying in the breeze. Sometimes, silence tells the best stories. Days passed, but the farm didn't return to silence. What had once been dust and decay was now seed and song. Earl kept working, though his body began to show its age. He no longer plowed with the same strength or lifted sacks like before. But his steps remained steady. Because now, he no longer walked alone. Mike decided to stay. He sold his car, left his city job, and built a small cabin at the edge of the property. "I want Eli to grow up with dirt on his feet, not concrete," he said. Earl didn't reply. He just placed an old hoe, once his father's, into Mike's hands. It was more than a tool. It was trust. The farm transformed. Kids from the school visited on field trips. Weekend workshops were held under the oak tree. The once-forgotten land became a classroom of hands-on wisdom. What had begun as a lone miracle turned into a shared lesson. Each guest left with something, even if it was just a seed wrapped in newspaper, marked with the words, "Don't plant it, pass it on with faith." One afternoon, Eli brought a blind girl named Lucy to the field. He guided her hand along the rows of tall stalks. "Feel this?" he asked. "It's like touching a hug." The girl smiled. Earl watched from a distance, heart full. What started as grief buried in dry earth now bloomed into gestures that time itself couldn't erase. Mike began writing, too. In another notebook, in his own handwriting, but with the same soul. He titled it, Dustborn Legacy. Inside, he wrote down every conversation with Earl, every lesson the land offered. He did it so Eli, and others, would know that they weren't inheriting just soil, but a story. Miss Patty and fell ill in those days. Before she passed, she asked to see Earl's field one last time. They brought her in a wheelchair. As she saw the golden rose rising high, her voice broke. "Now I can go." The land is singing again." Her words were later carved into a stone placed beside the original sprout. One evening, Earl returned quietly to the spot where he'd buried the letter to Mike. He dug gently, but all he found was a damp, disintegrated envelope. Nothing legible remained. Still, he smiled. "I don't need it anymore," he thought. "He's writing it with me now." Then he turned and walked back toward the field, with Buddy close behind. That night, a soft rain fell again, not as warning or punishment, but as blessing. The roof hummed with promise, and the mud underfoot smelled like new beginnings. Earl looked to the sky and whispered, almost like a child, "Thank you for the last chance, and for the strength not to waste it." Harvest came early that year. The ears of corn were thick, sweet, and cracked with a crunch like children's laughter. Earl walked through the rows with solemn calm, as if each plant was both a grave and a birth. Each kernel in his hands was a memory that refused to die. Mike led the harvest with Eli and a group of local teens. They called themselves the Sons of the Seed, not from pride, but from reverence. They wore denim shirts, wide-brimmed straw hats, and carried a promise in their hearts to never forget what a single seed can do. A journalist from a national magazine arrived to write a piece. She spent 3 days interviewing, photographing, listening. In the end, she wrote, "The miracle wasn't the rain or the corn. It was Earl Thompson's refusal to die before his time." Months later, that line was painted on a mural by art students in Memphis. Lucy, the blind girl, made a special request. She wanted to plant her own seed in the very spot where it had all begun. Earl took her hand, guided her fingers through the soil, and whispered, "You may not see, but your soul knows where life lives." She smiled, and with firm fingers, she placed the seed. Some say that was the second miracle. Earl began to tire faster. He slept more, spoke less, but his spirit was sharper than ever. In a quiet moment with Mike, he said, "The body's like a field. Once it gives its best, you just let it rest." Mike didn't cry then, but that night he wept alone, holding the notebook his father gave him. Before the next full moon, Earl made one final request, to walk once more through the fields at dawn. Mike helped him. Step by step, they moved through the rows until they reached the center of the land. Earl sat on a bench. Buddy lay beside him. Eli, unsure why, knelt silently nearby. "I didn't come looking for a miracle," Earl said softly. "I just didn't want to die without touching the earth again." That was his last sentence. He closed his eyes beneath the golden morning light. No cries, no drama. Just a breath. And a breeze that made the corn whisper, like the whole field was praying. The town held his wake with candles, ears of corn, and honest words. No preacher, no grand service. Just dirt-covered hands and tear-filled eyes. Eli hung a hand-painted sign at the farm's gate. "Here grew a man who never gave up." After the burial, the farm didn't fall quiet again. If anything, it became more alive. The cornfields rustled in the breeze, as if retelling Earl's story over and over. Eli still ran between the rows, now guiding Lucy by hand. She knew every plant by touch. And Buddy, the faithful donkey, wandered freely. But every evening, he stopped beside Earl's grave. Mike turned Earl's house into a community center. It became a place to share knowledge, seeds, and memories. Local kids learned how to plant, prune, and honor the rhythm of the land. On the walls hung photos of Earl, his quotes, and the original notebook, now bound and titled, "The Seed That Never Gave Up." One day, a woman arrived at the gate. It was Lucy, Earl's daughter, who had left for Houston years ago. She had read the magazine article and returned. As she stepped onto the farm, saw the mural, the children, and the rows of corn, she understood. Her father hadn't just been a farmer, he'd been the root of something far greater. Mike hugged her. At last, the three siblings were together again. Each year, on the anniversary of that first sprout, the community held a ceremony. No fireworks. No parades. Just hands in the dirt, old hymns, and symbolic plantings. Everyone wore white and brought a seed. Each family planted one, making a promise to never abandon faith or the land. They called it the Day of the Last Seed. Lucy grew up to lead programs for visually impaired children. She brought them to the farm, teaching them how to see with their hands, to feel with bare feet, to hear stories in the whisper of corn. Out here, she'd say, the earth doesn't judge. It just holds you. Buddy passed away 5 years later. He was buried beside the mother plant, in a small pen made of stones and branches. Eli placed a plaque that read, "The one who walked without asking and waited without giving up." Every new visitor to the farm is first introduced to Buddy, because every true story needs a witness. Mike, now older, kept writing. His new journal was titled, "Where the Fallen Rise Again." He recorded each change, each visit, each new blossom born in his father's name. And at the end of every entry, he always wrote the same line. Faith isn't explained. It's cultivated. And so, the land that was once dry, wounded, and forgotten became a school, a chapel, a living testimony. Because a single seed, buried without hope, can awaken an entire town when it's planted in pain and watered with love. They say some miracles fall from the sky wrapped in thunder and light, and others crawl through dry soil quietly until a tired heart decides not to give up. The miracle of Earl Thompson was never the rain, nor the corn. It was the hidden faith buried in ruins. It was the silent gesture of planting one last hope and not turning his back on the soil that once gave him life. He left no bank accounts, no deeds signed in offices, but he left a field that sings again, a son who learned to forgive with dirt on his hands, a boy who believed without understanding, and a town that rediscovered this truth. When faith is planted, the land answers. Today, somewhere in rural America, a stalk of corn dances in the wind. And if you lean in close enough, with a clean heart and quiet ears, you might still hear a whisper between the leaves. Thank you for not leaving me behind. Because sometimes, when everything seems lost, one seed is enough for God to return. We have reached the end of our story. Leave your like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.